Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Lieutenant Semenya. Together with Captain Ndwandwe and Lieutenant Makhathini, we are Group 1. We'll be presenting topic selection. Our topic selection, as I've mentioned, the aim is to discuss the selection as HR function, how it fits with other HR functions. Outcomes that we'll be covering, we will introduce, distinguish the recruitment with selection techniques. We'll cover how selection interacts with other HR functions. We'll cover process of developing a selection program. And lastly, we will cover the constraint in developing a selection program. Selection and recruitment are often confused. Selection, just like recruitment, is a very crucial part of the employment process. Recruitment and selection provide the means to resource or to staff the organization with the human capital it needs to sustain its competitive edge in the broader business environment. Recruitment versus selection. Recruitment is defined as attracting of a large number of people with the right qualification, the knowledge, skills, abilities, and other desired characteristics or competencies to apply for a vacancy. Whereas the selection is being defined as the final stage of decision making by applying scientific procedures in a scientific manner in choosing the most suitable candidate from a pool of candidates. Selection involves the steps. It involves the devices and method by which the sourced candidates are screened for choosing the most suitable person for vacant position in the organization. Selection as an HR function, it's a process that organization uses to determine which job applicant will be the most successful in meeting the demands of the job or will fit well with the existing work groups and the culture of the organization. Organizations commonly do selection for promotion or at initial job. At initial job, it involves applicants who are external to the organization. For promotion purposes, applicants already forms part of the organization. With internal applicants, much information about them exists. Information includes the evaluation made during the initial job selection, performances, reviews made by managers, training completed, compensation, and reprimands. Poor selection procedures and processes lead to various unnecessary costs in the organization. Therefore, HR process is very important. Why? Because of the production and the performance value companies get by making good hires and the high cost of replacing employees following bad hires. HR and hiring managers develop screening tools such as applications blanks, the interviews, the May test, background checks, and reference check and begin accepting the applications. Selection techniques. Various techniques to identify the suitability of applicants can be application blanks, can be interviews, letters of recommendations, assessment centers, and psychological, drug and physical strength test based on the job's requirement. Combination of this method are used in the hiring process. Firstly, it's selection based on the letter and CV. The first step in the process of selection is a screening of someone's CV, which is the first screening. This explains how organizations execute this first selection based on the CV of the applicant. The second technique is interview. This is the most common method of selection that we use. There's a different ways of interviewing. It can be a structured or unstructured interviews. Therefore, the interview, it's planned carefully, whereby the subject matter expert, such as the workers, the supervisors, and the trainer, form a panel of interviewers. Therefore, these experts, they have been told about the purpose of the interview and the importance of full and honest answers to the question being asked. The questions are carefully planned and clearly worded to get a maximum information about the job. Therefore, we can have unstructured or structured questionnaire, whereby unstructured questionnaires, the subject matter experts describe the component of job in their own words. And structured questionnaires, people are provided with description of task, procedures, and working. Psychological test as the third technique. The two most psychological tests that are being used are the general intelligence test, which is used to measure the ability to think, abstract, and to reason. These tests are focused on verbal and non-verbal quality of a person. The second psychological test, which is the personality test, it gives an indication of the character traits of an applicant. Characteristics which can be tested are, for example, we can test emotional stability, social extraversion, and assertiveness. The fourth technique is assessment centers, whereby the organization can choose to set up an assessment by themselves, or they can hire an external company which is specialized in this process. The assessment centers, it has a special trained observers who are focused on the behavior of the applicants. This assessment can be used to test a particular skills or to see if someone agrees with the norms and the values of the company. The other selection technique that we are looking at, it's work sample test, which is used to represent a specific task which is linked to a particular function. In this case, the employer can precisely see how a candidate is working. For example, the management assistant is given an assignment to type a letter without any mistake, which is difficult to do so when the function includes multiple tasks. Situational test, it's similar to the work sample test. The main difference is that this test is used for situations where it is difficult to test specific functions requirements. Example, it's a mental ability of a person. A famous example that we can give here is in basket test, in which a candidate has to deal with the mail of a colleague who becomes ill. In this case, it tests the administrative ability, the problem solving, and the management skills of the candidate. From now on, my colleague Capt. Ndwandwe will take over.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Captain Ndwandwe. As my colleague has alluded, I'm going to carry on with the last point of selection techniques, which is direct observation. In direct observation, the job analyst observes the representative sample of workers at various times throughout the workday. It helps to record if any factors such as fatigue influence the performance. The analyst remains unnoticeable so that the worker's performance is not influenced by his or her presence. The observation can be done through monitoring. The next point is the interaction of selection with other HR functions. As you see here in this diagram, selection is informed by the strategic human resource management, which first begins with recruitment, then selection, then the initial training of those candidates that are selected. Then obviously they have to be compensated, and as well as job performance should be measured in order to ensure or to see how those applicants are performing. The interaction of selection with other HR functions continues. Selection is not a standalone concept. As you have seen on the diagram above, it has to be applied within a process of acquiring HR capital for an organization in order to get maximum benefits from other HR systems shown on the figure above. Companies must design selection programs so that they greatly enhance employees' performance. It must be coordinated with the activities the firm carries out under recruitment, training, compensation, and performance feedback. For example, training is designed to teach necessary job skills and abilities to those individuals who have accepted a job offer as a result of the selection process. The content, length, and nature of training are affected by the level of skill and abilities of the individual selected. The same goes for compensation and selection. They interact in the fact that specific qualification possessed by the individual selected may affect the amount that he or she is paid. Also, the salary offer that is determined through the organization's recruitment and selection activities affects the applicant's decision to accept the offer or not. Moreover, selection and performance measures are linked. Work performance data are used to examine the effectiveness of the selections successful on the job. All right, next we're going to look at the process of developing a selection program. As you can see, the diagram presented in front of you present the steps involved in developing a selection program. As you can see, it begins right from the job analysis right to the use of assessment devices in the processing of applicants. The ultimate goal of selection is to hire the candidate who is best possible match for the job duties and the culture of the company. This makes using the right selection tools and developing them vital in order to develop a good and effective selection program. The developer must pay attention to the following: job analysis, which refers to the systematic way of gathering and analyzing information about the context, content, and human requirements of the jobs. Job identification of relevant job performance dimensions. As we know that jobs belong in different dimensions. It can be organizing, controlling, management, etc. Job specification refers to the identification of knowledge, skills, abilities necessary for the job. Development of assessment devices to measure the KSLs. The developer has to do factor analysis in order to come out with a manageable amount of items. Validation of the assessment devices. This refers to the degree to which the inferences drawn from a set of test scores about job preferences are accurate. Here, the different forms of validity are involved. Use of assessment devices in processing applicants. Here, already the tools are developed, then the developer makes use of it in assessing the applicant. There are 5 main steps in selection process. First, criteria are developed to determine how the person will be chosen. Second is review of the applications and resumes, often done via a computer program that can find keywords. Next, interviewing the employee. The last steps involve testing, such as personality test, and making the offer to the right applicant. Alluded to, I'll just go through to the constraints. That is our last scope point, understanding the constraints in developing a selection program. Time, as we all know, that instruments are developed over a longer period of time. On the flip side, people do not like completing long questionnaires. So times is a factor or a constraint. Legality. All assessments are regulated by legislation. In particular, psychological and cognitive assessment must strictly comply with legal and ethical regulations. These instruments are judiciously regulated by the Constitution, Labour Relations Act, as well as the Employment Equity Act, that is in the South African context. The other constraint involve cost. Developing an instrument is very expensive. For example, getting all the applicants in one place to develop group norms or visiting different cultural places, all these activities require a huge amount of resources. Cultural, language, and norming group challenges. In order for the instrument to be credible, the developer must ensure that the instrument accommodates all cultural groups upon which he intends to use the instrument. And lastly, issues of validity and reliability. The instrument will be useless if validity and reliability of the instrument are not credibly established, one of the major constraints in developing selection instruments. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to summarize and conclude our presentation. We've spoken about recruitment and selection, where we distinguished between the two, recruitment being the attraction of a larger pool of applicants to apply for vacancies in an organization, whereas selection is the making of the final decisions as to which applicant will be employed by the organization based on their suitability to the organization and its culture. We discussed selection techniques, where we spoke about interviews. We explained the different types of interviews. We spoke about assessment centers as well as observation. We spoke about how selection interacts with other HR functions. We explained that selection is not a standalone concept, but it is informed by the strategic objectives of the organization. We also discussed the steps involved in developing a selection program. We explained that you need to first do job analysis and then determine the applicable caseaus until you get to the stage where you make the final decision to say which applicant will be employed by the organization. We discussed the constraints involved with developing a selection program. We spoke about time. We said it takes time to develop an instrument, and as well as people do not like completing long questionnaires. We spoke about the cost involved. We said developing a selection instrument needs a lot or huge resources, and we spoke about legality as well as we spoke about the validation of the instrument. That, ladies and gentlemen, concludes our presentation. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. Thank you.